I'm going to be showing you guys how I created this crosshatch drawing of my friend Stephanie. So to start off, I stole this picture off of her Instagram. I got her permission, of course, but I got this picture, blew it up, printed it out, and then I taped it to the sketchbook that I'm going to be working out of. Now, after I taped it down, I started to draw out a grid. So each of the boxes in this grid are 3 inches by 3 inches. Now, I'm making sure my line goes slightly over the photo, so that way a mark gets on my sketchbook paper. So I have that for reference for when I do the same exact thing on the paper. So I'm going to have a matching grid, one on the photo I'm using for reference and another on my sketchbook page. Now, the benefit of this is it just makes it really easy for me to break up this portrait into different parts to better see where each part of her face would be. Otherwise, if we're working from scratch on a completely blank page, it can kind of be hard to gauge exactly where each part would be, especially if we're not perfect with anatomy. So this makes it just really easy to kind of check out the face and really analyze where each part should be on the page. And of course, you can use this technique for a few different ways. For example, maybe you don't have a printout like I do, so you might choose instead to draw this grid on the photo digitally. That's still going to be breaking up the photo to make it smaller chunks that are a little bit easier to see and just help your eye establish the different points. Something else you could always consider is doing a smaller grid. So I did 3 inches by 3 inches for my squares, but you can go much smaller than that if you needed to be more precise, or you can go larger if you feel more comfortable with it. It's really up to you, but this is just meant to be kind of another aid, another tool to kind of help guide your eye to really see the picture that we're working with. All right, so now that we have our grid, we're ready to actually start drawing. So we're really going to be paying close attention to our reference photo to see exactly where the outline of her face, her eyes, her nose, her mouth, where all the different parts lie in relation to our grid. So we're really taking a close look at that and just starting to block out where all the different features are. So for example, I can see her mouth is in kind of the top left corner of this square in my grid. So that makes it a little bit easier to gauge the size, gauge the proportion of it compared to the nose, and things like that. So I'm starting out very lightly just to get a really rough sketch of the placement, because there's a good chance this isn't going to be perfect. We're not tracing here. And that's also kind of the beauty of it. It gives us a more organic look than if we're tracing precisely. So I'm just loosely drawing in where all these different shapes would be, where all these different parts of her face would be. So now that I have this initial foundation, this light, rough sketch, now I can start to go in and really refine it and really start to further build out these different features. I'm starting to add in some of the main shadows. So these are some of the darkest parts of my picture, some of the most important shadows, and just starting to lightly sketch those in. And then, of course, going over a little bit darker and just starting to really emphasize some of those important features. And right now I'm just using a basic mechanical pencil, just because this is what I had handy, because it really doesn't matter what you use for this part of the process. I also don't have a smudge tool, so what I'm doing here is I'm actually smudging out some of those shadows with my finger just to make them look a little softer, to better identify those shadows. But of course, if you have a smudge tool, that works much better. Now, something else I like to do is actually flip my picture upside down. So I just did that here, but sometimes when you turn it upside down, you just start to get a different perspective. You can start to really see, oh man, this was actually really unproportionate, or this was actually really skewed. The angle that you look at something can completely change your perspective. So turning it upside down just gives you a different glimpse and can help you just further refine and further clean up the placement of the different facial features. All right, then I went ahead and I actually ended up switching my pencil. I found my better drawing pencil. So I went on to that, and then I also erased the grid. So I don't really need the grid now that I have all the facial features blocked out. I kind of understand the placement. So cleared out that grid with my eraser, and then going in with my pencil and just really starting to further emphasize the different features, make them bolder, make them darker, better allowing myself to see this face. And then I got my Micron pens, and this is where the cross-hatching magic happens. So cross-hatching, for anyone that this might be new to, it's basically a shading technique used in drawings that has a bunch of lines that go in various directions. So it's always a good idea to just kind of practice first before diving into it, or you could just go ahead and dive into it. But a few tips I would definitely give you are try to follow the shape of the object that you're drawing on. So if something's curved, for example, you'll want your line to be slightly curved in the direction that the object's going on. Or like a face, for example, you want it to kind of follow the curves, follow the contours of the face. Then once you've done those initial lines, you can start to cross over them in a diagonal direction, in the opposite direction they're going in. Now, another tip as you're doing cross-hatching, the further apart your lines are, the more lighter an area is going to seem. Or, vice versa, the closer together your lines are, the darker an area would be. And then, of course, the more hatches, the more lines that you put over top of one another are really going to start to continuously build and darken an area further. Now, something I did, this is just a personal thing. This is where you can kind of start to add your own style, but I started to actually draw out shadows first. So I started to create an outline where I kind of wanted shadows to be. I drew some outlines where I wanted the highlights to be. So I essentially used a line to start to create shapes to kind of encompass those regions. And then I would draw my lines coming out of those outlines. So again, that's not necessary at all. That's just something that you might notice that I did for this particular piece, just because I really kind of like the look of it. I like how it's a little abstract and a little more like gritty in a way. So yeah, definitely not necessary, just something I did here. So then once I had my crosshatch shadows, I started to build on these a little bit further. So I did go in with my pencil again, just to add a little more dimension to it by, again, just smudging the shadows behind some of those crosshatches to darken them a little bit further, but also just to kind of soften them in a way. Just because I kind of like that combination with the soft shadow and then the harsher crosshatches overlapping it. But again, just personal preference. You got to do what you like, what you prefer in your artwork. So then once I got to a good point with the face, I started moving on to the hair. And for this, I switched to a brush pen. Now, for the brush pen, her hair was definitely a challenge to work with, but a very fun, beautiful challenge. So I used this brush pen just to start to block out different. Now, I'm sorry if this panning of the camera is annoying. I promise it was not intentional. My camera on the tripod was actually slowly moving as I was filming, and I didn't realize it. But yeah, hopefully it's not too distracting for you guys. So anyways, I'm continuing to just create all these shapes within her hair. Now I'm using this as a base because I know I want to go over this with India ink later on to darken it. But having this base is just going to have a little more structure underneath the hair, so it doesn't just look like a big ink blob. It's going to give it a little more definition. So that's what I'm doing here with my brush pen. And then in addition to the hair, I'm also going over top different parts of the portrait that I want to emphasize further and really darken up. So for example, parts of the eyebrows, the lips, areas, the nose underneath, areas that I just want to draw more attention to and make more prominent in my picture. So then I went in with the India ink just to darken up the hair and to color in her shirt. And so just some tips for working with India ink. There's a few different ways to go about it. Now, something I like to do is just kind of start with my outline, which is what I created previously. And then from that outline, so like the shirt, for example, or the hair, I'll start to just paint in with water just creating the space that I want to add ink to later on. So this could be an example of how I go about the shirt. There's the water I used, or how I created the hair. But basically I'm just adding in that color. And then for the very dark spots, like the hair, for example, I just go in directly with the ink and use the little dropper tool built into it and just tap that onto the water. Now there's different brushes you can use. A heavier brush like this made for ink wash works really well just for dispersing the water. Dispersing the water. So here's my India ink, and this is what I was talking about before with how I took the droplet and just tapped it onto the page. So you can see here it creates just a really, really beautiful bleed effect. So this is great if you do want to get kind of a smoother transition between the colors. So I'm just tapping it here a little bit further to give a further example. And then you can take your brush and just start to blend it out a little bit further to smooth out the gradient more, or to make the darker areas a little bit wider, a little bit broader. But it's great because it really does try to stay within the water that you had painted as a first step. Then from there, you can always go in and add more gray, add more shadows to other places. So I did do this on a few of my shadows, again, just to kind of add a little more dimension to the crosshatches with a slightly softer shadow underneath. All right, and then we're getting close to the home stretch. So now I'm just going back in with my Micron pens and really continuing to add more detail. Now you could spend a ton of time on this step to really take it to the next level. I didn't spend a ton of time, but it would definitely be a much stronger piece if I did. So you can basically go through each strand of hair and keep adding detail, keep building on it with these Micron pens to start to define every little hairline. It's just a great way to add more detail to your image. Now what I'm showing here is what I did for the hair. So after I did the India ink, I took the India ink and I started to kind of look for shapes within it, to look for tendrils of hair. And I started to kind of follow the markings. So where there was like a darker splatter, I would kind of trace over that. Now, obviously not in like these circular shapes, but I would follow it as if it were a strand of hair. So that really helped to further define the hair and just make it a little more interesting. And then there's my final piece. So from here, I did actually go ahead and take it into Photoshop and then just do some extra photo manipulation to see if I liked different colors with it, different colored backgrounds. But of course, you could always do this traditionally. You can just go right in and paint the background in with acrylics or watercolor. Totally up to you. To keep the video focused on the traditional techniques, I'm not going to go into detail with the Photoshop tutorial or steps, but if you are interested in seeing that, definitely let me know and I can always do another tutorial on it. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this video helpful.